Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition in the Petri webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about managing your Office 365 install or your deployment or whatever you want to call it. Everybody's rolling out Office 365 these days, but getting it configured correctly so that you have all the good settings, making sure that your users can access everything they need can be a little bit more difficult than you might think. We've got Doug Davis with us today, who's going to walk us through some configuration and talk more about Office 365 in depth. And with that, Doug, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great, thanks Brad, and welcome everybody. We're going to be spending about an hour here going through how you inject management into your Office 365 migration. And kind of want to set some sort of initial thoughts on this. And one of the things that we have to always take a step back and think about is that migrations give you a unique opportunity. There is no other time that you're going to be able to and effectively be forced to touch every aspect of your environment. And I like to think of this as a renovation. You know, you're tearing something down and then you're putting it back up. You want it to more or less be similar to what you had before, but you're going to be able to clean out the old clutter, reorganize things, and like I say, finally throw out that old sweater. You know, you always be surprised when you pull down the walls and take a look at it. So I think of a migration as really as a remanagement. You're remanaging how you're doing that. So once you have everything cleaned up and once you sort of figure out, you know, what the renovation is going to look like, you need to manage. And if you don't really think manage, you'll end up in the same state again. So just like in a renovation, if you don't want to tear down the old stuff and put the old stuff back up again, we really want to do that. And this is what we're talking about in managing during a migration. And part of that is finally getting a sense of what's important to be, you know, like Brad said, to be configured, to be set up, to be done that. So hopefully by the time that our chat is concluded today, we'll have a really good sense of what are the main tools that you're going to be able to use to make that management opportunity become a reality during this migration. Now, this all starts well before you do your migration. So I always say that, you know, the 90% of a success of a migration is in the planning, okay? And you have to get started by planning well. So one of the things is to inject management into the migration as early as possible. If you don't, you're going to be migrating to an unmanaged environment, and just like the Wild West or any other kind of unmanaged area, you know, that's just going to open you up to all kinds of different challenges. One of the things is to ask yourself, you know, what is the aim of the migration? Often it's very much due to management mistakes of the past. There's a lot of migrations that our company is getting involved in where there's no technical reason necessarily to do the migration, but the group structure is horrible. All the people are in the wrong groups. You know, the configuration and the permissions are so messy that we're never going to be able to clean it up. So it's not sometimes just to get to the cloud. So, you know, that's definitely one of the big pushes for the Office 365 environment. But one of the things you're doing is you're trying to resolve the problems of the past and to improve efficiencies. And if this is what you really need to do, you need to think long and hard about that pre-existing migration environment and really think about what doesn't need to be migrated. It's definitely harder to clean up a running environment than review it when it's new. So this is the one time when all these objects are going to all of a sudden, you know, sort of appear in the new environment. You can pop up, you can do some work, you can take a look at it and be able to go there as well. And what needs to be changed during migration? So your migration plan has to have a management framework around it and say, if we want to make this, you know, this object, which is relatively unmanaged in the target environment, in the source environment, what's it going to be and need to be look like in the target environment as well. So review and improve throughout all your different settings and objects within this migration. So I like to break this down into three kind of general guidelines for when you approach. So for pre-migration, you want to do plan and purge. So you basically want to understand what your migration is going to be, purge all the information that you don't want to go across. Don't forget, migrations are usually very complex. They're usually automated. You're probably going to be using either a tool or a process or a consultant or some automated process is going to be able to bring this over. If you don't purge information early, you'll get an unmanaged environment that comes out of that. During the migration, rinse and clean. So this is an opportunity. Open up every object that comes over. Open up the mailbox, open up the groups, open up the permission models, the SharePoint structure, really everything, and just really get it cleaned up. Nobody's going to complain about something that's not being used. So at that time of the migration, before you turn on for the user, rinse and clean it. And then think about governance and management. This is really where, where what we're talking about today comes into play, is that once you have all that environment properly purged, rinsed, and cleaned, how do you manage it moving forward? And governance is a huge part of that, and how that actually plays into how your environment will get, whether you're successful, whether you end up with a managed or an unmanaged environment. So one of the things is to review the incoming objects. So one of the things is choose migration tools or processes or people, whatever you want to do, that allow you to change settings, names, etc. during the migration. So you really have to think hard about, what are the current naming standards, what are the current group structures, and generally speaking, what shape is your Active Directory in? We find that, I would say the majority of customers don't trust their Active Directory. They think the names are wrong, departments are wrong, the phone numbers are wrong, the managers are wrong, the group memberships are wrong. And really, this is unfortunate, because to get a managed environment, you really need to be able to pivot off of those. So if you're doing some governance based on department, country, you need to make sure that they're correct. We have had, we're going through some processes with some customers right now where they're saying, we have all these people in country A, but they're logging in country B. They must be wrong. Maybe, hook up your HR system somehow and to do a review on that. And maybe look at leveraging custom attributes. So custom attributes are really something that you own. You can do whatever you want to do with them. So if you have internal codes, internal ways that you want to restructure or sort of rethink about how you're using those Active Directory users and attributes, that's something that you can really do with it as well. So get a good long look at everything you have, see what shape it's in, and especially in the context of what kind of information is. So as people migrate over, also make sure that naming conventions are being adhered to. Oftentimes, again, we're doing searches through Active Directory, and country will be Germany or Deutschland. It's hard to merge those two. Try to decide, and again, we'll talk a little about this later when we talk about governance, but try to decide specifically what those naming standards should be. And then create the foundation of your managed environment. So during this migration, okay, it really allows you to take a step back. And I like to say that most people have a governance plan, but there's still quite a few organizations that don't have a governance plan. And I'll talk a little bit about governance in a little second. There are some governance documentations within the Microsoft documentation set. So you can sort of, go and use some of those, but I'll go a little bit more in depth in how that, and this is really how your management is done. So people often think that management is, just going through the configurations, make sure this is set, whatever. The problem is that if you don't keep that in place, you don't have a process to actually continue to do that, it will get out of sync very quickly. Review the native tools for administration and reporting. First of all, these change all the time. Don't forget, this is now, so if you're coming from an on-premise environment, this is a SaaS environment that gets updated whether you like it or not. You will be surprised quite often by new capabilities and new features that pop up every day, which is something you need to factor into your governance plan. If you had on-premise before, you can decide whether you apply hotfix or do anything like that. You won't be able to do that right now. Again, Microsoft has a lot of tools to train up and get ready for that. So you can go and take a look at throughout their entire documentation set. But you'll see that you also need to augment where required. There's a lot of resources, so a lot of expertise outside of Microsoft, a lot of tools outside of Microsoft. But you want to have this all in place before you start your migration. So you have a governance plan, Everybody's been trained up on native tools, and you found the gaps in the native tools, and if each of those gaps are filled with resources and tools. So I often get a question of what is governance? Can you give me an example of a governance document? What's a governance template? This, that, and the other thing. Governance is exactly what you define. It's flexible, okay? And it's a list of approved processes, escalations, settings, and guidelines for how the management will take place within, in this particular case, Office 365. They can be as complex or as easy as you want. I've seen very good governance plans that are a page long, and I've seen very bad governance plans that are 1,000 pages long, or vice versa. I've seen bad ones that are short and great ones that are long. It depends on how well your organization is able to adhere to those particular standards. So governance is a set of standards that can be adhered to, okay, versus a set of standards that you review and look at. So governance happens every day, every month, every week. You continue to go through that. A governance plan can be very simple. We'll have MFA, and MFA, just putting MFA, multi-factor authentication, drastically reduces the chance of a security breach within your environment. That might be all that's in your governance plan. Another governance plan might be that we always look at delegation. We look at who's our Google admins are, who have particular roles, what our permission rights are on particular documents, who's sharing stuff, goes in deeper and deeper and deeper. The key thing to remember about governance is that you need to have somebody, that's where I put in that word escalation, somebody who's in charge of it, who's tracking it, and is making sure that's actually able to go down. Cyber attackers bank on the fact that you won't really follow your own guidelines. So it needs to be automated as well, so it's not a human-only process. So people often think of governance as being these big, weighty documents that everybody goes through. No, you have to take that document and put it into effect. And this is basically what we're going to talk about through the rest of this presentation. You've kind of planned your migration, you've thought about it, and then you're trying to put in place this guard. Whether it's formal or informal, doesn't matter. Governance basically means that you're following some guidelines and making sure that they continue to be adhered to after the migration is complete. So it all comes down to put management first. So that's why I say when people say that they're doing a migration, I always say, actually, no, what you're doing is you're reviewing your management and putting in a different context. When your tenant is up and running, don't turn it on for everyone at once or anybody really. Again, this is a very common failure point when we go back and review mismanaged migrations. People say, well, we turned it on and everything didn't work. Well, you can't do that. You have to do test migrations. Nothing will be successful the first time. There'll always be tweaks you need to do. You do some test migrations. Can people log in? Can they get the emails? Can they get their resources? One of the biggest, initial failure points is if you go from one environment to another environment, you say, hey, this is a great opportunity to turn on MFA, and you haven't tested it and you haven't told everybody how to do it, and your end users are just frustrated with that. You're basically going to have a lot of challenges there, but make sure it's in place. Check settings, securities, permissions, accounts, important groups. This is the stuff that when you reviewed the Microsoft documentation, the training and how to do things. So I'm not going to tell you what's exactly perfect. Everything's a little bit different, but you want to be able to have that list and then apply that, make sure there's a governance plan. So if you have particular settings that you want to put into place, like MFA, is there a corresponding governance plan to do that? Security, permissions, accounts, important groups. So let's say there's a group that's called confidential documents. Who goes in that group? Who reviews that group? Who makes sure that people come out of that group? Who's in the governance plan to escalate? Who's responsible for it and how that go through? Again, this is all stuff that happens prior to the migration itself. Just a bit of a sidebar, because increasingly people are moving from tenant to tenant. So this is something that's very different if you're moving from an on-premise to a cloud environment. You have to get very used to the new tools. So in an on-premise environment, there's a lot of different tools you can use. There's tons of third-party tools. None of those tools, including native or third-party tool, will work properly. Most cases won't work at all. Some cases will work with tweaks. There are a few that are kind of hybrid that work in the environment. But for the majority of it, you're going to a brand new environment. You'll have no tools, and you'll have to look at the new administrative tools. The Office 365 Admin Center is huge. There's a lot there. Like I say, the good news is they're all in the same place, so you just go to one place for that. The bad news is that there are various degrees of usefulness from pretty good. Some of the admin centers are really good, to really downright horrible. Things like Security Compliance Center, for example, is one that people struggle with a lot. Delegated access will be a problem. You have this much more rich, robust environment, and you get services sometimes you don't want. So, for example, streams is something that I'm not saying you don't want, but you may not be aware of. So, you have very managed on-premise SharePoint environment and mail. Now you go into Office 365. Now, people can start using streams to do videos, and they're using forms, and they're using Power BI, and they're using all these other things. You hadn't really thought about that. And the tendency is to start giving out all these global admin rights because people, as we have a daily challenge to get things, done, sometimes just always easy to turn that on. So always review who really needs to be a global administrator. Your governance plan should have one of the first tenets should be every week, month, whatever the schedule you think is appropriate. We're going to review who our global administrators are, and we're going to go and actually look at, whether or not they still need to be there. Now, one of the things, this is, it's kind of one of my longer slides, and I was trying to shorten it down a little bit, but really have to understand, why does this global admin problem keep happening? The challenge was that, Microsoft, rightfully so, says don't do global admin accounts, but you will keep hitting rights where you need to give somebody just a little bit, but the only available right to give to that person is global admin rights. So, you want them to do a little bit of team management or a little bit of exchange management, and there's no sort of delegated right to do that. Now, Microsoft has introduced role-based access controls, but however, Microsoft Office 365 is a huge environment. There's a lot of different teams at Microsoft. They're under the same constraints and challenges that everybody else does when we're building software. So, you have people who are writing, kind of the RBAC capabilities within Office 365 are primarily for, hit the biggest number of people that they possibly can. So they're simplified and they're idealized. But you can't get any more precise. In a large environment, you want to have very granular rights to do that. So from that perspective, it is something that continues to lead to too many global administrators, and we'll talk about how to get around that management constraint. So one thing you need to do is understand who gets the keys. So again, as you go through your management planning, you need to put together a permission plan, which is part of your wider governance plan. Permission plan is basically where you set the guidelines of who has access to what. You have to really educate yourself. Education is crucial in any time that we do this stuff. Anytime you give out some rights, usually gives them more than you expected. So one of the biggest challenges that you're merrily working away in your Min tools, and it says, oh, I need to give somebody access to a particular workload, and it just says there, oh, just give this person access. You go, okay, not realizing in the back end you've actually gone through and given them some fairly weighty access across the line. In order to be able to figure that out, because there's nowhere that you can really go and see where everybody has every little bit of access. So, even sort of falling off of the global administrators, you're getting into some pretty heavy duty permissions and settings in the background. So you need some really strong audit capabilities as well. So you need to be able to do this as well. And this is where we've really been saying that you need to consider a delegated access control system. You need to be able to take all those locks and put a more delegated access on them and have tons of keys instead of just a small set of keys. And then once that's in place, whether you're using delegated access or just the built-in access from Microsoft, review these permissions all the time. It happens time and time again that we get into situations because we have some audit capabilities. Customers will say, I need to download your software so I can audit my event log because somebody who wasn't a global administrator, I think did something, 3-4 weeks ago, and I'm not sure how that happened. So you need to be able to review those permissions all the time as well, so that they are fairly cleaned up. Another thing is that reporting beyond the admin tools, one of the key frustration points in the Office 365 administration tool is that it's kind of like every team took their own approach to reporting, and that's exactly what happened. So the Exchange team built their reporting infrastructure, the SharePoint team built the reporting infrastructure, the Teams team did the new stuff that comes online like Sway and Flow and whatnot. They have their own as well. So there's a lot of different UIs and UXs, settings, configurations, access, and it gets very tiring. And time is of an essence in an environment. So if we're continually being asked to somehow, put together these reports that feed into our governance plan, how do we do this? And there are a few options to improve upon this space set. One is to leverage Power BI, especially if you already have it in your license. So Power BI is included in a number of license sets from Microsoft. I'm not going to start to unpack all the license options that Microsoft has, but the higher you go, naturally, the more likely it is to be included. But there's also a bevy of third-party tools that are out there, and if you are doing that, it should be cloud-based, kind of cloud on cloud. So if you're going to a SaaS environment, then downgrade your capabilities, to an on-premise environment for management tools. These people will start to get comfortable using the cloud to do these things as well. So let's look at Power BI. So Power BI is something that does, again, we're feeding into this concept that a governance plan is really at the hub of what we're trying to do to keep this thing configured. Power BI is very powerful. It can be very complex, so it requires a lot of setup and configuration, and you have to manage your configuration and keep it up to date. So one of the things is you have to bring your data to Power BI. There are some report packs and other things that kind of make it easier, but as you get a little bit deeper, you want to get through. But as you can see, this is a typical Power BI dashboard, and it's giving me a pretty good sense of my Office 365 adoption, active users by product, how many people are using email and Yammer and Skype or whatever else might be out there any particular given time. This is a much nicer consolidated view. If you know any of the Min tools, you kind of have to bounce back and forth between different Min tools to get some of this information, and you can massage it and you can change it up as well. And then there's third-party tools. So this is something that Quadratec fits into, for example. There's a number that are out there. They can also be very powerful. One of the things that is usually a hallmark of third-party tools is that they're easier to set up. We have to have something ready for you to use as soon as you want to use it. Data collection optimization is done for you, so that's one challenge. So I think like the Mint Center challenge is a challenge of nothing really being the same and very frustrating to get the data. The Power BI challenge is that the data is not there. Where a third-party tool kind of plays is that the data is presented to you, it's optimized, it's already configured, and you have the ability to give people just access to the data and nothing else within the environment. So Mint Center tools, for example, require them to have at least some basic administration capabilities in Office 365. Third-party tools can totally separate that, and they can just do that for there. And some of the things you want to make sure as well is that you're not degrading anything else. So check for encryption of data. What does it store? Can it anonymize? Can it be selective with the data that it shows? Things of that nature as well. So some of the advantages of a third-party tool. So all the reports are in one place. So if you look at this, so this is our product, but there's a number of products out there as well. You kind of have these things that are kind of in these kind of nice clusters. So we want to have security reports. So out there, who's administering stuff? What security events are there? What are my password policies? What's my mailbox security? What's my adoption reports? How is Teams being used? SharePoint, OneDrive? What's my top mail? How are my mobile devices being used? What's my license reporting like? And I can kind of go in and continue to change and modify these in particular. And if you were in a Min tools, you'd have to go into each individual one. But this is the type of stuff that you want to have managed. So when you're going through after you made those kind of fundamental changes to your environment to make it managed, you want to go back and change these. The data is gathered, enhanced, and automated. So there's a data collector in the background that keeps doing that. It can be used for pre-migration reporting as well. So if you take that step back where we're talking about the planning phase, you want to be able to run this against your target and your source environment, and be able to sort of come up with what types of things are there. So if we take a look at review who has rights, so this is a major tenet of this types of migrations. This is what you would have to do on the target side. So on the source side, so basically who are the global administrators, who has access, should they have it, do we need to remove them, do we need to change them? And then run this again when you're in your target environment, and keep asking yourself, and also do simple things like if somebody has an administrative role but they've been disabled or they haven't logged in for 8 months, you need to purge those as well. There's an insane amount of old data in all of these environments, which are making them not being able to be managed moving forward. One of the things you want to do, because in this new environment, you're going to have challenges often with what's happening. So how do you report around event logs and security events, or any kind of events really? There's a huge consolidated log in Office 365. So, in the on-premise world, you had workstation logs and domain controller logs and server logs and all kinds of different things. Every workload feeds into the same log within Office 365. Security and Compliance Center is a pretty good start. The challenges with security and compliance is that you really need to kind of know what you're looking for, and it doesn't really highlight challenges within that. So if you look at an audit exploration tool, that really allows you to unpack those, and there's a number of those on the market as well. So that as you kind of review things that happen within a particular environment, so you have your group set up, you have your users set up, and you want to make sure that they continue to be configured properly and used properly, you can go through the audit log and prove that. So somebody says, anybody logged in who shouldn't log in for a particular resource, you go through the event logs and find those. And again, that's part of your management governance plan moving forward. Managing cleanup, this is a huge component of management, and there's no single admin center report on inactive and underused objects. So, this is something that you want to either, again, you can create this, you can, if you're good at PowerShell, you can create this PowerShell. If you're good with Power BI, if you want to use a third-party tool for it, doesn't matter. This is one of the things that you have to get into place. Management, often people think that it's, turning all this and going through, but because it's a networking environment like Office 365 is a living organism. It's going to change continually. So you have to be able to go through this list on a regular basis. So, here's a couple of examples here, but there's tons. Users with no exchange activity. So if you're a big, huge email exchange environment and people aren't using it, are they even active? Are they even around anymore? Users with no activity in past 3 months, empty or one-person teams, which are completely useless, inactive SharePoint sites. It's amazing how much deadwood comes around there. And, you can run hundreds of these types of little views, and get even deeper into some of the other things. With delegate access, you can then parse these out to end user administrators, et cetera, as well. So for example, if you have empty or one-person teams, who the manager of the teams are, and you've delegated that down to particular people, you can ask people to clean them up. So one of the things is don't try to do it all your own. A good structure with top-level administrators and then tiered sub-administrators and end-user administrators is a really good way of doing that. But again, make cleanup something, and you should be pretty good at it because you did it part of your migration. Continue to do that on a scheduled basis, weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever works. Some organizations don't do cleanup for years at a time. So even to do it, 4 times a year or 10 times a year is going to be well above the industry norm. So again, just going through some of the things here, and actually, I think some of my slides didn't show up. Just give me a second here. Oops. See if this pops up now. Here we go. So let's also talk about delegation and policy controls. Actually, I was supposed to talk about this a little bit before, and for some reason got hidden in my slide deck. But one of the things that you want to do is put into place something that really allows you to change up how you're actually managing the environment from a permission permission aspect from actually getting into the Office 365 environment. So there's tons of capabilities within Office 365. A lot of them are manual. A lot of them need to be thought about. A lot of them need to be kind of like, calculated from the perspective of how you're going to actually get through and do something. So a delegated system puts into place extremely granular role-based access control. So this global administration challenge, really means that it's often hard for us to actually break things down and be able to figure out where a particular right is given to somebody. You can also do pre-configured actions. So as part of that governance plan, we kind of said, when we create a new group, you have to put a certain description on it. You need to make sure that it has, who the owner is a particular level of manager. There, other settings and configurations are put in place with it. Same with creating a new team, creating a new SharePoint site. So it's able to actually run things. So one of the challenges of the native tools is that you can click something and do something, but then the subsequent actions are probably not necessarily highlighted. So a tool that allows you to actually have that happen and be able to go through there as well. And then have highly granular delegated rights. It really does need to be able to be honed into a very particular view and a particular series of things. So we take a look at some of the things that we have here in this particular one, which allows me to say that I can create a user, okay, and that user can do very specific things. They can set out of Office, they can do a password reset, they can manage MFA, they can manage a distribution list, they can create a team, they can add a talent to a team, whatever you want to do. When you remove that kind of core layer that says basically there's global admins and there's a little bit of delegated access, then you can start doing things where you can really take a look, what is costing us the most money to manage? That's really not all that hard to do. So, setting out of offices for people, that is an example, be able to go through there and actually kind of figure out, who can do that. So maybe there's 3 people in the organization that can do that. They don't want to give them any other rights, want to be able to actually do that down there as well. So if you're having an environment and you're trying to make sure that you're putting this infrastructure in place, having a really strong, deep delegated engine will allow you to do that. So there will be a lot of capabilities from that perspective. So that's something that you can put in place as well. So now it gets me back a bit more on my slides. So I'm just going to go back down. So let's review a few things here. So really, when we kind of go back and we kind of think about how we've kind of taken this approach. So, what's different from a traditional migration plan? So traditional migration plan, I go right into the migration, I start moving things, and I kind of don't get it, I get exactly what I had when I started the entire migration. So planning and purging, so reviewing that again, basically I'm going through my infrastructure, I'm finding out, what's underutilized, what's not required anymore, what's out of date, and I reset all that information as much as possible in the source environment. Then I rinse and clean. So rinsing and cleaning means that as I bring information across, I'm changing it, I'm putting into place other capabilities and other constraints, and I'm really making sure that I can fit exactly the types of objects that I need to into my new environment. And then the most important aspect is this governance and management constraint. And that's really around, as I said, making sure you understand the environment, how it's supposed to be managed. You can then go through and basically put into place, a proper governance plan that's as complex or as easy as you want it to do. And you make sure that management becomes part of that particular process. And you want to make it automated so that you want to leverage every possible tool that's available to you. So I talked about, kind of like, the native tools, the third-party tools that kind of go through there. Whatever mix works the best for you, make sure that it's something that's not 100% human-driven, and we can actually get a little bit deeper into there. That's pretty much it. It's not an overly complex approach, but it's oftentimes it continues to get challenging, and a lot of times we still can't, get a successful migration as we want to do. So that's pretty much it for the focus part of the migration. I just want to leave it open if there's any questions or anything else that might have come up, Brad. While I was.
There's definitely quite a few questions. The first one says, does the reporting from Quadratec product handle multiple tenants, subtenants, or just a single tenant?
It is multi-tenant planning, so it is multi-tenant reporting. So that's a good question, and one of the things that the migration does often open up is the opportunity to have multiple tenants. So if you have different countries or different jurisdictions or things that you're doing, so oftentimes people will have 5, 6, 20, 100. We have some customers with 100 plus tenants, and all of our tools, on the management and reporting side are multi-tenant, so that you can run reports on single tenant or across all the different tenants. So yes, there's some strong multi-tenant support in those products.
Another question was, is there a recommended number of global admins you recommend per user base count? Or I'm guessing user base size.
Sure. I mean, not really, because it depends on, it's always the least possible. It should always be 2. It should never just be 1. That has happened in the past where there's just been 1 and nobody knows the password for it. So it's a bit of a challenge. I think if you don't have a delegated access control system, you probably want to have, let's say per 1,000, you want to have 3 to 5, for that. If you have a delegated access plan in place, so, we have some customers that have 100,000 users, have a very small number of global users, but have, hundreds of delegated access people. I think it's the number is always probably 1 less than what you have right now, in a sense. You should minimize that number at all possible. And if it is fairly high, if it's over that kind of, 5 per 1,000, you're probably leaving yourself open to. But then that number in a sense is irrelevant, because if it's just given to the wrong person, it opens you up for a lot of challenges. And I think the best answer to that is to rethink your role-based access control approach, and try to minimize the number of global admins you have.
The next question says, does the Quadratec monitoring solution allow you to drill into the individual users to see their permissions?
You can. It depends on the workload. So, you can find out, what permission somebody has on mailboxes, for example. They've access to other people's mailboxes. You can see whether or not where their permissions are throughout SharePoint, throughout, in some cases, some of the team stuff, OneDrive. One of the nice things as well is that since you have access to an event log, you can also see where permissions have been given out. So one of the things, so oftentimes you're trying to figure out, when you're trying to figure out the permission footprint, and you can definitely do that, or you're also trying to figure out what has changed to that person's permission footprint. So you can go to the event log viewer and basically say, in the last 4 months, what permissions have user X been given or been revoked, and see kind of the trend of that as well.
Gotcha. And the other question that just came in and says, does this product require Azure Active Directory, or what are the requirements do we need to deploy the software?
So deploy the software, it's pretty simple. So it primarily requires just an Azure app. So there's an authenticated Azure app that does the majority of the gathering. There's some legacy gathering that happens through PowerShell, which requires a service account. So during the configuration, you would create a service account, log in. That service account is then given the rights to be able to do certain things, and then that feeds back to your database that runs the majority of the reports and the delegation. The nice thing about that is that we're not really part of that process. You do that on your own tenant. We never see the password. We never see anything related to that. But by its nature, you just need to have an Office 365 environment, which always has Azure on the back end, and we leverage those capabilities.
Gotcha. Another question that just came in says, do you have any demos or free trials or any way for us to explore or examine our own environment?
Absolutely. So all of our tools, you're allowed to do a demo on them. So you can contact Quadratec and they'll set you up and be able to go through that. And that's probably the best way to also get a feel for whether or not the tool is right for you, and do that as either part or prior to the formal migration planning.
Yep, and then this question has been asked, I think, 7 times now. People love your slides, Doug,
Okay.
and they want a copy of them. I can answer that one once the webinar is all done. Give us a few days, and we will get an email with a replay link where you can get the content that Doug is talking about today.
Perfect.
Oh, another question.
Anything else?
Doug, they keep coming in. That's not a problem.
Sure,
People
no
are
problem.
curious how this product is licensed.
So it's licensed by user. So the number of users you have in your environment. So if you have 100 users, you need 100 licenses. If you have 1,000 users, you need 1,000 licenses. And those are heartbeats. Those are actual user licenses. So it does include if you have contacts or guest, accounts, things of that nature. So it's somebody who has an assigned Microsoft license, either E3, E5, kiosk, whichever one they're particularly done for. So it's done on the user basis, not on number of administrators or anything like that.
Let's see, there's still questions popping in. It says, will this also work for Office 365 to Office 365 migrations? So tenant to tenant?
Sure. So definitely, the administrative tools aren't particularly migration ones, but we do have Cloud Commander, which is another tool. So I actually go back up here. Whoops, one too many. So this, migration integration, across our, tenant to tenant migrations are a big part of what we do as well. So, migrations, reporting, security and audit, delegation, policy control, and service monitoring.
Let's see here. Looking through. What about Teams integration? Does this product support Teams, or is it only for the older applications at this time?
So we have grown it into newer ones. So definitely, Teams has come on strong. We talked for Teams forever. I think Teams has been, the standout new service. For us, for the longest time it was all about mail. There was some SharePoint. Yammer never really kind of took off. Skype was there, but definitely Skype was an external thing, with a little bit of internal use. Teams has really revitalized a lot of communication within Office 365, so it's important that we have it. So we have it as part of our migration capabilities, part of our reporting capabilities, and very strongly part of our delegation. One of the key things about Teams is that you don't want to have too many. You want to be very focused. You want to be able to people be able to manage them as well. They're kind of this unmanaged mess, but by nature it needs to be unmanaged. It's about unstructured communications. So having the delegated access to that is really key as well, and that's something that has been added to our tool as well. I think of some of the other workloads, that have come on that we're still waiting to see just how well they're being adopted. Streams definitely is coming on stream, no pun intended. But Sway, Flow, some of the other ones, Power Apps, some of the other quote unquote workloads or services, we're still seeing to see how much we need to accept those or adopt those within that. So some things you still need to have kind of a good mix of some of the min tools, and hybrid tools to work on those as well.
Yep, the questions keep coming, Doug. People love picking your brain. Okay. It says, what about Skype for Business interoperability with Teams? Will it work in case of migration?
So they continue to. So that's very much kind of a Microsoft capability. Definitely integration continues to. So Teams is really the focus of that. So Skype is being more or less replaced by Teams, and with PSTN and other ways that you can do it, the interoperability is there for quite a bit, but really you kind of have to make a decision whether to use Skype or Teams in your organization. They do interoperate independently, but there's not a lot of overlap. So there's not a lot of Skype stuff that you see within Teams, not a Teams stuff that you see in Skype. Some of the more recent updates, I talked about the fact that the platform kind of updates itself. So Outlook integration came strongly into Teams recently. You'll probably see more integration and interoperability between Teams and Outlook and Teams and SharePoint. Skype for Business, there's some, but I think it's rapidly, fading into the background. If I looked at our numbers, 2 years ago, external calls with customers in our organization were almost 100% Skype. I mean, Teams wasn't really out then. Now it's about 95% Teams. So I don't think that there's going to be a lot more interoperability between the two. But what is there does work, and we definitely manage both those workloads within our tools.
Next question it says, what kind of mailbox migration speed difference is there between the native Exchange migration tool versus the third-party solution?
Well, the native, there's not really much in the way of native tools. There is a native tool set, and you can go through that. It is meant as a sort of a general migration tool. But when you really want to get massive migration capabilities across, so when you think about, I talked about that middle part where you want to sort of rinse and clean. That's really during the migration part of it, and if it can't take too long either. You do have this. The source environment is still there, but the target environment is there. You want to have the downtime, or not even the downtime, but just the ambiguity of having those two environments be as short as possible. So the maximum amount to minimize the time for that really is key. So what we do is we maximize throttling and services and multi-threading and all those kinds of things. So it's many factors faster than the native tools, and it does allow you to really automate that process as well. So it's really nice, and that means that you have less a chance of getting unmanaged as well. So when you have both environments running for an extended period of time, you're doubling up your IT capabilities in a sense. You got to manage the old environment, you got to manage the new environment, and you miss those opportunities to clean that up. So having a very rapid migration capability is really key to making that management work.
Gotcha. And then this might be the last question, unless more come in. It says, does the tooling support G Suite migration into Office 365, including data conversion from Google Apps to Microsoft Office?
Not at the moment. So, one of the nice things about being focused on Microsoft is you generally speaking get to cover 90-95% of the market. So as much as G Suite is great, it's a good environment. The penetration within the enterprise space, which where we currently really focus on, is still generally speaking low, and those folks that are there tend to like it and stay there. So we've looked at it in the past. I think this is one thing about Microsoft is that kudos to them. They've really put together an infrastructure and a platform. That's what they focus on. The platform really has a lot of capabilities, and that's why it's been so readily adopted. I mean, part of that is because of the legacy Microsoft penetration they had before. We look at G Suite every 6 months. We kind of ask people, and we never see it really getting to the level where we need to there's so many people, and the percentage penetration of the Office 365 is so strong that we have not had to yet anyways to take a look at the G Suite integration, but that might change. We always review it, but those capabilities are not there at the moment.
And then one last question, Doug. If people have additional questions, what's the best way to get in contact with you, or what should they do?
So there's a lot of capabilities there. So quadratechit.com is probably the best way to go. And there's a contact us on that page, and they can kind of go there and follow us on our Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube channels, all those kinds of things.
Fantastic, Doug. Well, we appreciate you taking your time. We appreciate everybody joining us today. And like I said previously, this information will be back up on petri.com/webinars, but give us a couple of days to get things cleaned up, and then you'll be able to get all this access to this content yet again. But Doug, thanks for tuning in. Thanks to everybody else for hanging out. We'll catch all of you right back here next time.